So who am I? I'm Howard Cohen. I'm a Chief Systems Engineer at L3 Harris. I have a Bachelor's in Mechanical Engineering, a Master's in Systems. This is my 18th year doing FIRST, which makes me feel old knowing that I'm older than most of everyone here, except for one. I'm a member of the FIRST Hall of Fame Committee with 359. I run different off-seasons, like here I run the Brunswick Eruption off-seasons, and I was a scholarship winner in 2011. And I do want to make it clear I don't work for FIRST. So a couple of fun facts, a couple of pictures. Got to do this in China, that was a lot of fun. Speak fluent Chinese. So some agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about some perspectives, a couple metrics, physical properties of things, statistics, psychology, and then we're going to go right into economics. So we got a couple things to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about the seven bridges problem. So this was originally brought to us by Euler in the 1700s, and the idea was, can you cross all seven bridges without having to backtrack? And if you want to take a moment and, with your mind or your finger, try to do this yourself, you'll come to the same conclusion that Euler came, that it's impossible. You can't cross every single bridge without backtracking. And Euler thought about this for a while and created the polyhedron formula that we use today to solve network problems like this. And it becomes like a 2D topology problem, which you can see he changed the picture to a more simplified version to now a network problem. If each dot has an even number of connections, it's possible. But if there's an odd number of connections, it's only possible if you start or end there, which is a max of 2. So if it's 0, there are no odds. If there's 1, you have to start or end there. And then if there's 2, you have to start or end at the other one. Now if there's 3, right, that's when you have that problem. So this is used today. This is an active area of research that people do this. And think about, plowing roads, postal delivery. You don't want to backtrack, especially if there's one-way roads. You have to make sure that you clear every single road with trying to be as optimal as possible. So very, very useful, very, very fun things to do. This is still, again, active area. Every so often you might see a challenge math problem with this. This next one, fun to know, not as useful. 4-color map theorem. It says that no more than 4 colors are needed to color regions of any 2D map so that adjacent regions have the same color. And for fun, I took these off of Wikipedia. They colored in the map of the United States using the 4-color map theorem. And this is a fun thing if you have a couple of young kids like elementary school ages where you can teach them about this. Try and draw a map that you can only do 5 colors. You can't do 4. And I had a cousin. He was about 4 or 5 years old. I kept him occupied for 3 full days just on this one problem. We were just drawing with marker and color pencil, trying to make these maps and kind of make these little things. And obviously it never happened, but I was able to keep him occupied for a while. Fun fact here is that this is the first major mathematical proof that was validated by computer first. So there were so many possible iterations of this that it was almost impossible for a human to do this, or a team of humans to do this, so that it was validated by a computer. The proof was only accepted a few years later after other methods to validate it were found. So now we're going to get to the next one, and this is where it's a little bit more interactive. Is it possible to connect all 9 of these dots by pen using straight lines without lifting or retracing with 4 or less lines? So I'm going to give you guys a moment. See if you guys can figure this out either mentally or try and draw it on a piece of paper, see if you can figure out a solution. We're going to spend like a full minute on this, so take your time. All right, so from a show of hands, was anybody able to solve the problem? All right, what was the solution?
Oh, it goes straight down, all the way beyond the last dot, and it goes diagonally up to cover 2 more, and then it comes back.
Yeah, perfect. That's one of the solutions. So the idea here is when you change the perspective of the problem, there are more solutions that you could find within that universe. So, as you said, right, one, you go further away from just the perspective of the picture. Another one is if you imagine you had a piece of paper and you rolled it, you can draw a single line to connect all the dots. And then another fun one, right, if you make the dots really, really, really thick, you can make this zigzag pattern to get all of them. And, some people may think, oh, that's not the problem. Like, no, this is really how things work in real life, right? Sometimes you have a unique problem that's a little bit different than that standard generalized thing. And you can find a solution for your unique problem. And, we tend to think of things like the three-body problem, right? There's a whole Netflix series on that. When you bound the three-body problem, there are some solutions to it, but the general one has not yet found a solution. So, changing your perspective, bounding the problem, you can change the outcome and create solutions that didn't originally exist. So let's talk a little bit about metrics. So I'm going to ask the question, right, how far is something? So, how far are you guys from home? Does anybody want to answer that question? How far is somebody from home right now?
37 months.
What was that?
30 minutes?
30 minutes?
2-3 miles.
2-3 miles?
15 minutes.
15 minutes?
6 miles.
6 miles? So what's interesting here, right, I asked how far is something, right? That's a distance measurement. But some people are answering in terms of time, right? Sometimes when we measure distance by time because that's more useful to us, right? But if you change the mode of transportation, that also changes the time. But we found that as humans, it's more convenient to convey a different metric. And sometimes answering a question, the wrong unit is more helpful than the correct unit. So what's interesting is this is a very active area of research and active area for industry where they're trying to create KPIs or key performance indicators or indices. And there are just jobs, like huge jobs, just dedicated to just tracking these, right? There's one called the Big Mac Index where you could track the incomes, you could track the level of social income between different countries by looking at the cost of a Big Mac in one location to another. To use the example here, right? A Big Mac in New York City costs one price, but a Big Mac in the UK or Japan or Germany, all cost a different price. So, and this goes down even to the local level, right? As you think of New York City to New Jersey or to Alabama or Georgia or Hawaii, they all have a different cost at each respective location. So we're going to move into a little bit more of physics here where, we talk about forces. And one of the things that a lot of students get confused is Newton's second law versus Newton's third law. Newton's second law is F equals ma. Newton's third law is action and reaction. So what I did here is I took a picture of a truss, and I wanted to show you guys, right? You have a reaction force, and you also have forces that are internal. You have the force of gravity, right? If I wanted to calculate the force, I can use F equals ma. But if I wanted to know the reactions, right, that's Newton's third law. So if I have this truss, and I push on the truss from the side, right, I'm not exactly going to have the same reaction force across the entire truss. At each of those little points, those little dots, right, that reaction is going to be a little bit different because of those internal forces acting on it. We tend to think oftentimes when we push something, if we push a single particle of the system, the entire system moves, but that's not really always true, right? If you think about a pool of water, if I kind of swish the water, right, I'm pushing on that system, the entire puddle doesn't move. And this is true for a bunch of different things, but sometimes it's more convenient, right? If I hold something in the air and I push on a single point of it, the whole thing moves, right? That's sometimes more convenient for us to think about. So one example of this is the slinky in the air problem, right? If you look at the bottom of the slinky doesn't actually start falling until all that tension inside of that spring is consumed, right? Instantaneously, the center of mass is changing, it's moving down. However, the entire system isn't moving immediately. So sometimes you really have to think about the forces that are on the system, both internal and external, before you really wonder how a system's going to act in general. But yeah, fun experiment. You can do this in person in real life. These are real things that you can do. So Young's modulus and Hooke. So a lot of people know Young's modulus. A couple people know Hooke's law. Real quick, Hooke's law is how you can find force within springs. Young's modulus is a mechanical property of solid materials that measures the tensile or compressive stiffness when a force is applied lengthwise. So I like to think of this graph as the fishing rod graph, right? You have your base of the fishing rod where it's nice and straight, and you have your modulus of resilience, and then kind of where it bends, right where the edge of that fishing rod is, and it changes after it hits the yield strength, and that's its ultimate area, and then the fracture point. So if I were to bend something and it stays within that modulus of resilience, it'll bend back to normal, right? The fishing hook will come right back to normal, right? But if I hit a critical point, that yield strength, I've now permanently deformed the object. It will never come back to where it was. And then obviously when I hit that fracture point, the fishing will snap. So different properties for different regions of the curve, right? And this is, very active areas of research where people will create different materials, different alloys, different compositions of materials to try to manipulate this graph to be either more useful or more sensitive in regions that they care about. And these are things that you can also do today. I keep talking about a spring. If I take a spring and I hyperextend it, it'll deform. It'll actually enter into that ultimate yield strength area, and it'll deform the spring. It'll change its K constant. And sometimes this is what you want to do. You want to change your spring from one K constant to another K constant because it's always the same. And that could be a desired outcome, right? Then there's some other ones where they have mechanical safety lockouts. They design things to fracture. They design things to break as a safety lockout. So, these are still very active areas of research. So the next one I want to talk about is heat transfer. We have our three main ways of doing heat transfer: conduction, convection, radiation. And what I did was I grabbed a picture of heat transfer of a boiling pot of water. And you can see, conduction, radiation, convection. And, what you notice here in this picture, right, the water in the pot is not all the same temperature. If I were to take, boiling pot of water, I take a thermometer and I put it all the way to the bottom, you're going to get one temperature. And if I put it at the top, you're going to get another temperature, right? And sometimes this is some areas where how you measure something changes how it reports the number. So if I were to put it all the way at the bottom, I'm not really getting the temperature of the water. Sometimes I might really be getting the temperature of the flame. And if I get it at the top, I'm getting kind of more of a, one edge of the measurement rather than an average measurement. So there's active areas of conversation, of research of how do you measure something, not just what the number is. And, there's a phrase called the watch kettle never boils, right? There's different types of boiling, right? And, we tend to think of boiling as this frothy, rolling boil in a pot. But boiling really occurs when you start to see this, this nucleation, this, eddy currents starting to occur within water. And they start to mix naturally just because of the difference in temperature. So this is going to come to our next question. So imagine you've been in an area that's in room temperature, like maybe you're in this room for a long time, and you touch the door. If you touch the door frame, is it going to be hot or cold? And if I touch the door handle, is it going to be hot or cold? So does anyone have an answer? If I touch the door frame, is it hot or cold?
Inside or outside the room?
Yeah, right here, this room.
Inside.
Yeah.
It's going to be warmer than the door handle.
Okay, that's one answer. Another answer, anyone else? Yeah?
It'll be the same temperature.
Be the same temperature, yeah?
Are we?
Yeah, it's going to be the same temperature, right? The whole room has soaked in room temperature. But why does one feel hotter or colder than another?
It's the rate at which heat gets transferred.
Yeah, it is. It's related to the rate that the heat gets transferred, right? Different objects have different thermal conductive properties, right? So we tend to think like, if I touch a piece of metal, right, it's cold, right? It's actually taking more heat away from me because of those thermal conduction properties. There are adult engineers that mix up this idea, even to today. I've seen this happen many, many times. So what's important though is sometimes being able to manipulate that. In some of our motors that we use for competition, right, you need to break in the motors. You need to drive the motors full speed for 10, 15 minutes. But the problem with that is they start to overheat. So what can you do to try to A, not make them overheat, and B, still have that optimized time of breaking in the motor? And sometimes I'll just tell kids, slap a piece of metal on top of it, let that be a heat sink. So another fun fact is, does anyone have a Nintendo Switch? So the Nintendo Switch, they have a fan on top of their processor, but the fan is not actually on the processor. They're trying to keep the thing as thin as possible. They have what's called a heat pipe. They have a piece of metal that's on top of the processor to draw away, wick away the heat from it. And then somewhere else in the heat pipe, they have a fan to help blow it away. So these are still active areas where people try to figure out how do we, A, remove heat or sometimes bring heat to something. So we're going to move into our next major topic of statistics, and this is the central limit theorem. This is the bedrock of modern day statistics. When appropriate conditions, and so the appropriate conditions may mean you have a good number of samples, it's independent, it's not biased initially, the distribution of a normalized version of the sample mean converges to that of the standard normal distribution. We'll see a picture of that in a little bit. And this is true even if the original variables themselves are not normally distributed. So even if I had a binomial distribution, a 0 or a 1, this is still true. And the classic version of the central limit theorem says as you get more samples, the sample average approaches the population average. And if you take a distribution of those sample averages, you get the standard normal curve. So this distribution approaches a normal curve regardless of whether or not the initial distribution of that population is independent. So if you think about, right, if I have a coin, I flip it 0, 1, right? On average, I might expect a 1/2. If I take a set of samples of heads, tails, 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 heads, right, and I start to average it over time, I'm going to get probably close to 1/2. And if I do this ad infinitum, right, I'm going to get 1/2 as my, sample average, which approaches the generalized population average of 1/2. So the standard normal curve is used in many, many different applications. And what I did was I took the standard normal curve and I drew it up here, and I have the little sections and how much they're percentage-wise worth. And if you take statistics, you'll learn about this, and you'll learn how to manipulate this curve and calculate the sums and all that, and point to point. But these are active areas where people do this almost every day to try to figure out, right? Do I have a defect rate? Of how many samples do I have a defect? Well, if my sample rate has a defect of 1%, I know my population is probably around 1%. So 1% of anything I ship out of the door, I know will have a problem. And there are active areas where you can do what's called lean Six Sigma, where you try to have 6 sigmas or 6 averages away from the mean of quality, so that when you hit the real world, you'll have one defect in millions of your products. So innovation adoption curve. So this is not just talking about making things out of a factory. This also talks about humans and social settings, right? If I have a new piece of technology, right, I'm going to inevitably have the innovators who adopt the technology immediately. And then you have those early adopters who like, oh wait, let's start taking this. And then an early and late majority. And then all the way at the end, you have those laggers. And I think the one that's probably most relevant to today is AI. We all have that friend who's been all in AI ever since they got their token to use ChatGPT. And then you have a couple of other friends that, oh, okay, now that this is a thing, let me start using it. And then you have those people like, hey, I'm just going to use this for homework to help me out, or I'm going to feed it my math problem so I can guide me to a solution, right? No one's ever used AI to do their homework for them. It only used to help them, right, guys? Yeah, I see a couple of people. Right? And then there's people who don't want to use AI at all, right? And you start seeing this kind of push-pull even in industry where some people are adopting it immediately and some people are saying, hey, this is not for me. And, that's just one example, but think of another example of when smartphones first came out, right? Some people immediately took it on, some people didn't take it on. And I like to use the example of the flip phone, not the old flip phone, but the ones that have the screen that flip out, right? When Huawei put those out, there were some people that immediately adopted it and started saying, wow, this is a new piece of technology. Yeah, this is a new piece of technology. This is the new way, right? And then there are some people like, I would never want one that, I just want the old style, never want to do this. But you think about that and you start realizing, wait a minute, other companies are now following this thing. Apple reportedly has one that's on the way, Google as well. So you start seeing even at the company level, this adoption curve still remains true. So we're going to move into psychology now, and we're going to talk about cognitive load. And what I like to do is, especially when we think about a scouting form, if I want students to scout a match in robotics, right, there's certain aspects that I'm looking for. And I may want a lot of different metrics, a lot of different information, but at the same time, a match is only 2.5 minutes long. Do they have enough time between the start of one match and the end of another match to A, watch the match, fill out the form, hand it in, get the next one, and B, are they able to cognitively understand, see, know, and be able to write down, report on what they just saw? And this is where cognitive load comes into play. If I give them too much information, they're just overwhelmed, they don't know what to do. But if I give them too little, I might be missing a metric that I might be relying on later. And this is something that's true in many forms, though how something is presented can be more important than what is presented. Has anyone been to a fast food place like a McDonald's or Burger King, Sonic, In-N-Out, and there's a bunch of options on the board? And you're like, oh, I don't know what I want. I just want a burger. I don't know. And then you get to the front. They say, well, are you ready for your order? There's people behind you. And you just, I want a #1 combo, please, thank you. And all of a sudden now you're not just getting the burger, you're getting the fries, you're getting the soda included in your meal. You're getting upcharged. And when people are presented with a large number of options, they tend to bias towards what's most familiar. They also tend to bias towards what's easiest. And that's why McDonald's and all those fast food industries, they have those nice, easy, I want a #1 combo meal, please, thank you. Simple, done, I can move on. It's not, yeah, can I get this and this and this? And companies know this. They use this to make people spend more or reduce their costs, right? Maybe I'm going to prioritize one part of our menu over another so I can stock more of this and maybe only sometimes do that. And sometimes those items are the ones that are the most profitable. Does anyone know why McDonald's chose to sell hamburgers and fries? And soda, obviously, because those were the products that had the highest margins.
Right.
So they realized, the McDonald's brothers, if they were to get rid of over half their menu, they used to sell grilled cheese sandwiches. If they reduced their menu to just the ones that had the highest margins, they were able to reduce the time people were thinking about the menu, and B, optimize on their costs by only stocking a few items. So, you can take one element of psychology, push it down all the way down to your menu. And this is things that companies do today to try to optimize their costs of how much people are going to spend and how much they can reduce their costs. I don't know, kids these days may not use them now, but an ATM, if you use an ATM, they'll ask you a bunch of questions. Do you want to withdraw? Do you want to deposit? How much money do you want? Do you want to check your balance? This, that, and the other thing. PNC Bank, for the longest time, had the highest success rate of any company ATM in the United States. And the reason was they asked you one question at a time. They tried to present questions in the form of a yes or no question. And they tried to reduce the number of options that were in front of somebody so that it was easier for them to get through all the menu options. And that success rate means a lot, right? That means that you can process more people, that it's more useful for someone. And ultimately, if they're able to use an automated machine, they don't actually need to go to a person and then you have to spend money on a person. So that's another fun, psychology thing. But we're going to talk about another one called the mere exposure effect. And the idea here is that people tend to develop preferences to things that they're exposed to. So the more you see something, the more you tend to like it a little bit more. So maybe it's a song you listen to, right? There are a couple of songs like Shake It Off, right? Initially, I didn't like it, but the more I listened to it, the more I really liked it. And that can be said to a lot of different things, right? The more you see it, the more you start to like it a little bit more. And sometimes this really goes down to psychology where, companies will spend a lot of money to get a logo in front of you, to get a jingle in front of you, right? And, you can think about a couple of those company jingles, and when you think about them, you like, oh man, I really want, something of theirs. These are active areas of research, and it's often used to market to the public. What I find really funny about marketing is that when marketers go to companies, they say, hey, you really want to use us? And they say, well, how do you know this works? They say it works in politics. And then when marketers go to politics and say, well, how do you know this works? And they say it works in company marketing. And it's one of those, it's the same side of the other side of the same coin, where they try to use psychology to market things to people the best that they can. So the mere exposure effect, it's even more than just what I'm talking about right now. A lot of you guys are in school, a lot of you guys work at a company, right? You tend to see those same people over and over again. You tend to like those people more and more. And sometimes that develops people creating relationships, and that also sometimes, right, you're out on the road, you say like, oh, hey, I see you here out there, I see you only at work. So, this mere exposure effect, those biases, they're already inside of you. You just didn't know until someone told you. So now we're going to talk about economics and opportunity cost, one of the bedrock principles of economics. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. So if I have a Snickers valued at $1 and I had a Twix valued at $1.50, what is my opportunity cost? Does anyone want to try and take a stab at that? So the opportunity cost would be 50 cents, right? If I took the Twix, right, I use 50 more cents to get that. Or if I got a Snickers, right, I would just be spending the $1 and I'd have 50 cents extra. Now, a little bit more relevant of an example may be a Coke or a Celsius, right? A Coke has, it's like a generic soda versus a Celsius, which is an energy drink, right? They're a little bit different, but one is twice the cost, right? Do I need that energy? Do I want to spend a little bit more money to get that immediate burst of energy? Or do I save that and I just take that regular refreshment? And there's a joke in economics where what happens if I had that same choice presented to me, right? My opportunity cost between a Coke and a Celsius is $1.50, but let's say I was offered a Celsius and a Celsius, what's my opportunity cost, right? So the way to imagine this sometimes in a more practical sense is after your day, after work, after school, you have 6 effort hours left in the day. So you can use that to study, you can use that to watch TV, play games, socialize, take a nap, whatever you want to do. It could be possible to combine a few of those things, right? Maybe you can socialize and play video games at the same time. Maybe you're able to socialize together, group study with one another. Maybe you just want to go to bed, right? But you can't do all of the things at the same time. So how do you prioritize them? And that answer can change based on the day, based on the hour, based on the circumstance that's in front of you. Maybe you have an exam that's coming up tomorrow. Hey, I need to spend all 6 of those hours hard studying on this one topic. Or, hey, I'm done with school. I'm going to go out and play baseball. Like, these things change based upon the circumstances that are presented to you. And sometimes these can change based on the minute, right? You get new information and all of a sudden your plans change. So sometimes, and this even happens at the robotics team level, I tell them, right, you have 4 hours of meeting time every time you meet. What are you going to do those 4 hours on? Are you going to take that first hour and just plan your meeting? Well, maybe if you spent that 1 hour doing something else, like building the robot or coding, that's more effective. And that even comes to the daily life. I'm going to spend a couple of days just giving the robot to our programmers so they can find problems and then hand it back to the mechanical team, right? There are different ways to view this. And what I find often is that when you strategize a little bit and you plan your plan before you execute it, you can make those effort hours as efficient as possible, especially for the robotics build season.
Best example for build season is, you're going to build tonight. Then at the end of the day, your last class, teacher said, we got this happening tomorrow. So now what do? Do you study or do you go to build? So again, you have to prioritize. You got to work in that you have the same 4 hours or whatever it is, and you have to figure out which one you're going to do and how you're going to do it. So sometimes you can plan your days, other times you can't.
Yeah. And this even got to a level where with one team, we had 4 hours. It was broken down by the 15 minutes, right? Every 15 minutes, there was a task assigned to building on the robot. And there was a person in front of the robot. If they were ready, they could do it. If they were not ready, they got pushed to the side and another person came up. So, sometimes planning the plan is more important than the plan itself. So, this is our one of our last examples that I have here is to open or close a shop, right? You have fixed costs and variable costs, right? Fixed cost is what you need to pay regardless of you doing anything. So that could be your rent, your insurance, baseline utilities, right? Keep your refrigerator going, your loans and salaries. And then you have your variable costs. And this can change based on your output or need, right? So these are all materials. Think I have a bakery, right? I need flour, I need dough, I need eggs. Hourly wages, utilities, right? I need to turn the oven on. I need to, at some level spend money for that oven. And then shipping, right? And then there's a bunch of other different ways of looking at this problem, but at the end of the day, it kind of goes down to your fixed costs and your variable costs. So how do you know whether you should open or close? Anyone, any ideas?
You have to crunch all the numbers and see if it works out.
You do need to crunch numbers, but there's a nice little formula you can find.
Profit.
Profit is in there, yes. Yeah.
Is it that the income has to just overcome the variable cost?
Yeah. Your profit has to overcome profit, not income, right? You don't want to just talk about those sunken costs, right? If your income is over your variable costs. Now, interestingly, right, does this change by day? yeah, this could change by day, right? You know, Saturdays versus weekends or weekdays, you know, you have a different crowd, different population across all hours. And then sometimes you think about this not just by day, but by hour, right? Should we open all the way to midnight? Well, how many people are going to find a croissant at 11 o'clock at night? Or maybe you're a Walmart. There's a bunch of people that need to use the pharmacy and they have different hours of work, right? Do you want to support that or not? And you know, these are questions that businesses face every day, right? So when profits are projected to be greater than your variable costs, you open, and if they're not, you close. And sometimes there's more into that calculus than just that, you know, simple, nice formula. But you know, these numbers can change based on the hour, based on the day. And every company, every business at some level faces this challenge. How many hours a day should I be open? How many days of the week should I be open? And sometimes it's more than just the cost. Sometimes it's also social things, right? Can I staff the day? Do I have enough energy to do this 7 days a week versus 6 or 5 days a week, right? So you also think about that opportunity cost, right? If I work 7 days a week, I could get a little bit more profit, but at the same time, I'm also draining my battery, right? I can only work so many times in a row. So, you know, psychology and economics sometimes really do go hand in hand. So a couple things to remember, and I always like to say this at any time I present, is try to keep things simple, right? You know, make things as simple as possible, but not simpler. Focus on a few things. Perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, it's when there's nothing left to take away. And then finally, know the value of what you're doing. Time is the most valuable thing a man can spend, and I'm thankful that I can spend it with you guys. So thank you. I didn't know if I would get the time, but since we do have time, I have one more challenge problem for you guys. So the problem is you are at a music concert, or maybe you're going to the bathroom, and there's a bunch of different restroom stalls. How many times do I need to look through the bathroom stalls until I can go to one that is the best possible one that I can go to? So, you know, take a little bit to think about this problem. This is, again, an active area of research problem. And when I give you guys the answer, I'll tell you a little fun fact about it as well. So, you know, and then think about it. Think of it in terms of 3, 5, 10, 100, right? You know, this answer can change. Yeah.
I think you reject like the first something percent, and then after that you find the best one that was better than the best one you rejected.
That's
choose that
almost there. You're on the right track.
Yeah, something a little random, right? But I used to always skip like the first two. Over time, I've noticed that now everyone skips the first two. So now I always check the first one. Because not like in more recent times, I have found more success in the first stall compared to all the other stalls after it.
So these are things that people really do, right? You're trying to go to the bathroom, you're looking at the stall, oh, I'm not doing that one. You go to the next one, okay, this is good enough, right? You know, these are active things that people do. You're subconsciously doing, you're not realizing it. So I'll give you guys another minute or so to think about that, and I'll give you the answer.
Also, I find it funny, this camera is like so locked onto your face. Like if you walk, it's gonna be like... It like drew its own green box around you and everything. It's like locked and loaded.
All right, so the idea is you're looking at a bunch of restroom stalls and you're trying to figure out which one's the best one. And you were right? A lot of people like to average it down to 1/3, but if you do the raw math, it's about 37%. The idea is if you look at the first 37% of the bathroom stalls, you take the next one that has the higher average than what you just saw. And we think about this as bathrooms, right? We've already seen a ton of bathrooms in our lives, right? And once we reach a level of acceptability, you just take the first one you see, because you're not going to go look at every single one. It's kind of weird. And also a little bit more effort than people are willing to expend. But we already know kind of an idea of what we deem as acceptable. Now, the extension of this problem and a logical meaning is people use this to find a lover in their life, right? Whether they want to date somebody or not. there's a level of number of people that they've been with or number of people that they would like to be with. And what math says is if you date, quote unquote, the first 37% of the people that you may ever date, right? You take the next average higher one and then you lock into that person. And there are some people that really do try to use this in their life. They'll date a couple people for a week or so at a time, figure out what that is, figure out what their average of what they accept is, and then when they hit somebody that's higher than that average, they lock into that person and they try and take it longer. So, we tend to think there's a lot of problems, a lot of concepts, a lot of challenges that people just randomly think up, and then they start using a lot of math, a lot of science to try to validate their hypotheses, their theories. And then you get concepts like those problems, like the 9-dot problem, the 7 bridges problem, the bathroom stall problem. And there are elements of truth that you can use from all of these examples. So with that, thank you guys for coming. That was some useful and fun STEM concepts to remember.